Tom, I see you've been keeping busy.
Yes, I have. And you probably can't tell which of me.
That's pretty good.
I was going to keep going, but my friend has vertigo, and she said, "You got to turn it off." Do, do, do.
I like it.
It's a little distracting. I'm going to put it on the beach.
Ah,
I know, it actually makes me feel a little calmer. Is it nice where you are outside?
yes, sun's finally out.
Oh, it feels so good. Maybe we should just skip this and go outside to the
Okay.
beach.
It's still a little chilly though.
It is. It is indeed. Do-do-do. Hey guys, if you have cameras, make sure you turn them on, provided you're decent. Get started in just a couple minutes. There's only 4 of us. The 4 cool people are already here. So
I wonder if other people are attending the NASW conference today.
Yeah, I did get a bunch of people said they were going to that. So that's a virtual I'm very curious to see how they run it.
It was pretty good. I attended Sunday and Monday.
Oh, no kidding. And what do you do? You go to the room where the session is?
So it's a link, and then they have set up all the exhibit halls, and then you click on the workshop halls, and then you click which workshop that you want to participate in.
Wow.
And then the presenter shows up on the screen and presents their slides, and most of them were pre-recorded, and then the presenter was involved in the chat to answer any questions.
Right. Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Neat. Yeah, like this format, I find it's difficult. The interactive part is very difficult for me, especially when we started with like 17 people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but now my room's on fire, so. Yeah, I spend too much time on Zoom, clearly. So let's get started. Maybe people will pop in. One of the things I've been thinking about, I run a support group for supervisors it's a different project with the MHTTC. And you guys are all invited to that. If you check out the MHTTC website, you should find that. I do it at Thursdays at 2. But I wanted to just throw out to you guys, not only are you supervisors, but many of you are running programs. And I just wonder, how are you guys doing and how are you taking care of yourself? What's it like for you?
I'm enjoying myself at home. Yeah, I don't have a problem with this at all. Like, don't mind the homeschooling as much, but other than that,
Yeah.
Everything's going pretty good.
Yeah. I've had other people say that, like, this is kind of a dream for me. Like, if they like their house and they like their people they live with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Neat.
Yeah, for me, I'm sort of surprised how smoothly everything, transitioned to sort of working from remotely, working from home, for a staff who's in the office every day, considering the big lift that this was going to be, it actually went very smoothly. And I think just being patient with yourself and realizing, that things aren't going to be functioning completely as normal, and that everyone sort of around the world is experiencing at least similar challenges. And you just have to kind of realize what you have to give a little bit on and what you can celebrate for going well. So for me, it's working out as well.
Nice. Yeah, I find that the lack of structure, it took me a long time to find some semblance of structure. So now I usually wear my jacket actually, and try to dress up every morning, start the day at the same time, stuff like that. Anyone else? The question is, how are you guys doing being supervisors and leaders with this quarantine situation?
For me as an administrator, it's been kind of tough because I have to create new policies and procedures, and then I have to create ways to monitor how we are in fact delivering services and look at the come up with look at outcomes and look at the fidelity of what's being provided, and then also getting the staff to understand that um, it's still business as usual. The policies and procedures don't go out the window because you are providing telehealth services. You still have to worry about confidentiality. You still have to worry about, counseling 101. It's still in full effect. And I think that what's been happening is many have been turning this into as though we're just having a rap session. And I'm saying that this is not what this is about.
Right.
We're still providing clinical services. And so for me, it's been kind of a challenge. Um, I wouldn't say that it's been exhausting or tiring, but what I would say is that it has been challenging, but it also has taught me a lot more about myself in terms of what I recognize and how quickly I can adjust. And so, you know, I think the most difficult part about this whole quarantine for me is not being able to go to the gym. I didn't realize how much I would miss going to the gym and, you know, getting in the pool every week and, stuff like that. But other than that, I'm pretty much a homebody. So I'm okay with that. But my self-care piece was, the pool and getting the workout. So I'm trying to adjust and come out of this with my waistline intact.
Yeah, it's a good point that so many people had to scramble, and hopefully it's slowing down, but scramble to figure it all out really quickly. And that's certainly true in the system I work in. How about someone else? How are you dealing with just staying at home and being a leader and being a supervisor?
I think I can echo some of the comments that were just shared. It's like this rash of policy and procedure and protocol development that just seems, I mean, there are peaks and valleys, but when it's needed, it's like needed right away, right? And you can be on a call about one set of policy and procedure, and then you get an email about another set that needs to be done like yesterday, right? And it's just it's I don't know, for me, I had this impression prior to even thinking about having to work from home, that working from home would be this sort of lower stress environment. And what it's turning out is that the stress has sort of ramped up significantly from what it would normally be like at the office, where you can run over across the hall and just pop into somebody's office to have a quick conversation, whereas now it's phone call after video call after conference call after all of this stuff. So it's a stressful time. Self-care is really important. you know for me, it was being able to go to the barbershop and just hang out and relax. So I can't do that right now. So I had to just cut all the hair off my head. But yeah, it's a lot more difficult time than I think many of us anticipated it would be.
Yeah,
Ask Leslie a question.
sure.
Sure.
So in your policy development, as you're developing these policies, you're right. Because I went through a day, I promise you, this is not a joke. I went through one particular day where we developed 3 policies, and then by the end of the day, all 3 of them had completely changed
Mm-hmm.
as we were getting information in from the state.
Yep.
So how would you say, what would you say has been like something that's helpful for you in terms of getting the buy-in from the staff? Because I think for me, that's where it's been a struggle, because I don't know if they think that it's me that's coming up with these changes to make their life more difficult, or
Oh man.
yeah.
I think being able to explain why why the changes are being made to the best of our ability. I know, my agency, we deal with a lot of CSS. I don't know if you know much about CSS because you're talking about counseling, but there are regulations involved in CSS that just make no sense. And
Okay.
sometimes it's just telling the staff like, hey, I know this makes no sense, but this is what the regulation says. And, this is what we have to do if we want to make sure that we maintain our license. And also just having that transparency that, hey, we don't always have all the answers, right? Like I think Yalam says that he talks about being an expert but not infallible guide to his clients. And I look at it the same way. I'm an expert, but I am not infallible. My CEO is not infallible. A director of operations is not infallible, right? So we may have these ideas of what's going to work. We try to put it in place, and 5 minutes later it blows up, and it's like, oh, okay. Well, now let's pick up the pieces and let's do this again, right? Let's
Right.
rewrite this policy and procedure. Let's rewrite these protocols or tweak what needs to be tweaked so that we can actually get this work done. And, I think the last thing is just reminding them of why we're doing this, right? We're helping vulnerable people. We're helping people that need the services and support that we provide. And without us, many of them would end up in the hospital. Many of them would end up in group homes. Many of them would end up homeless, right? So we need to be able to provide these services. And so let's do everything we can to do so.
Yeah. And continue to get rid.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the reimbursed part is really important, but
Yeah.
that part is my job to make sure that I put in place the things in the background so we can get reimbursed.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that has a whole lot to do with the stress right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I also say to them, I'm trying to make sure that we all remain gainfully employed, because I would love to be able to send you home and just let you be with your families and you still receive, pay and different things like that. But unfortunately, we're not in that type of position. And, that's just not real life.
Nope.
It's not. So thank you, though. I appreciate everything that you said.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, that was really good. Anyone else want to talk about how they're doing being a leader and a supervisor in this kind of strange time? So I encourage you, if one thing I think we'll talk about today is the value of a peer network. And I found that by the time I became a director, I was a director of a partial care program here in Flemington, New Jersey, and I had no peer network. I had gotten to the point where everyone was either subordinate to me or way ahead above me. And so it was a struggle where to find support. So if you don't have a peer, how many people say they have a peer network they can lean on that either does something similar or can relate to what you do?
I have one, but I think that this pandemic has put a lot of strain on people's ability to be able to do anything extra.
Yeah.
It's for my peers because of the roles that we play.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, any extra time, whether it's 10 minutes or 5, I want it for myself to just kind of gather myself. So it's been difficult in that sense. But we have been communicating like via text. And I've gotten some phone calls and I've made some phone calls, but I don't want to I don't want to create a Zoom meeting for my peers. I'm zoomed out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zoom fatigue, I've heard it called.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Linda.
Hi.
Hi, I just wanted to say for us in our agency, in terms of the leadership, we have weekly calls where, not only are we just discussing program updates, but we are talking about the different things that, we may be struggling with, whether it's with leading our staff, you know, and just the different struggles that we're going through with this whole situation with COVID. And we have also, so that's been helpful. So, and we do it on a weekly basis, and it is via a Zoom call. And we've also incorporated, because I'm the head of the staff wellness committee within my agency. So I've incorporated, in addition to that, a weekly staff wellness meditation hour.
Nice.
Where, you know, somebody, if they just want to come log on, it's every Friday at 11 o'clock. And we do some meditation, and we'll talk about it and process it. It's not God-based or anything like that, but it's just a spiritual pause, you know, where we can just sort of just let go, because we take on a lot on the course of the day. And even working at home, we've been talking about working at home and how, you know, it just seems, you know, a lot more overwhelming than it was in the office, and the different challenges that we go through in being in, you know, at home, you know. So those outlets are excellent, you know, with our peers. And then just personally, you know, I have my own things that I do. You know, I do my yoga, and I also share these with my peers. I say, you know, I have this yoga thing that I'm doing. You know, they offer these free classes, and just different things like that, just to help to keep the stress down, because it does get a little stressed, you know, assisting and being there for other people and trying to keep them engaged and motivated also to continue to do this work in a different way.
Yeah, so I'm hearing that people that are in larger agencies have kind of natural peers at their same level, which I think is really helpful. I mean, Leslie said something really important. It used to be I got all my support naturalistically, right? I would just go across the hall, or, you know, people were just there. And now I have to reach out, or put myself in a position to receive that support. So yeah, strange times. Anybody else before we jump into the more didactic supervision? All right. Well, so I cracked the case when it came to sharing my screen, which I'll do. It turns out all I needed to do was log off and log back on. It would have been fine, but I didn't do that. So that was last week. Oops. All right. Can people see this slide? Make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Ooh.
What should we be looking at? The tension?
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, that. Yep. So in my notes, this was the slide we stopped on, slide 13, and this topic is the normative function of clinical supervision. Can anybody tell me what the three functions are for $10,000? $10,000.
Normative, formative.
Oh, so close. The most important one.
Formative.
Reflective, right? Who's
So
that talking?
Restorative.
And restorative.
Restorative.
Got it, yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. So this slide, I think, is one of the most critical aspects of clinical supervision, and how we all as supervisors resolve this tension is really critically important about whether we become really good at clinical supervision or not. And it's the tension between keeping the folks we supervise safe, so their psychological safety and ours, and at the same time holding them accountable for the work they do. And I don't think it's ever perfect, but this tension and resolving and confronting this tension is a big part of what being a good supervisor is about, I believe. Any thoughts on this? Is this something people have struggled with themselves? This tension?
I would definitely say I'm probably experiencing a lot of that now.
Right. Yeah, I do support, I mentioned I do support meetings for supervisors, but also for line staff. And some of the line staff said, like, you know, my supervisor's trying to hold me accountable for productivity standards that were the same as when I was in the office. And now I have my kids here and my family, and right. And so I get it. It's a difficult slog. So I don't have the answer to this, but I think knowing that this is attention is really important. So one of the things that hurt me as a clinical supervisor was this thing. This is from Tony Buttersworth, as a researcher in clinical supervision, and he called it a tyranny of niceness. And because I grew up as a counselor and a therapist and became a supervisor, I brought all of those counseling and therapy strategies into supervision. And so I really wanted to maintain a very strong relationship, almost a therapeutic relationship. And I erred on the side of being overly nice. And according to Buttersworth, doing this can leave people inexperienced and without direction, and maybe lets people stray too far from what we expect of them. And in the end, it really harms consumers, right? Because if we're not holding the staff accountable, then they're unlikely to do the best job they can do for folks. So I just love this idea of a tyranny of niceness. So in the normative function, where we try to identify and hold people responsible to the norms of the field, to the standards of evidence-based practices, and ethically accountable, it's really critical that we get good at feedback and evaluation. And it's really the core mechanism in the normative function to get people the feedback they need to do their job really well. And a while back, I saw this NPR, or heard this NPR interview with a consultant, and the consultant said that they're brought in when they have performance problems in organizations. And what the consultant said, and he didn't present any evidence, but he said it was over and over and over, he saw the same thing. And that was that the problem person needed to hear directly what the issue was. And oftentimes, if they were being belligerent or whatever the problem with the employee was, the consultant said that leadership was dancing around the issue to such a degree that the employee didn't know. Now, in my experience, sometimes it's hard to imagine they didn't know because they seem so belligerent. It's just so off base. But according to this consultant, that was the main intervention, was simply being very straight with the person and simply saying what the concerns were from their colleagues and whatnot. So I took that to heart. I think that's a really important life lesson. So why feedback and evaluation? So it's really about the organization's mission in the end. It's not about developing friendships with our subordinates and things like that. And of course, we want to essentially shape behaviors that promote the mission and discourage or extinguish behaviors that don't. And the main mechanism is corrective feedback and the promotion of what in the literature it's called reflective practice. Other folks call it mindfulness, but mindfulness maybe has baggage associated with Eastern religions or something. But the idea of reflective practice, where as a professional, are we thinking about why we're doing what we're doing and if it's the best course? So you see the idea of reflective practice quite a bit in the literature on clinical supervision. The other thing we can do, and I've mentioned this before in the formative function, is compare staff performance to reference standards, including standards that they've set for themselves. Like I've had staff that wanted to improve in a particular theoretical orientation or say cognitive behavioral strategies. And so we compared their performance with their goal, what they set out to do. And then because we're supervisors and if we don't record it, if we don't document it, it didn't happen, we need to document stuff that inform promotion, merit increases, and discipline, which I think we're all aware of. All right. So it's so interesting. Right before this meeting, I was talking to a colleague, and we had just completed a group together, a Zoom group, and she said, Tom, I got to tell you, and I hope you don't take offense, but you talk too much. You talk too much in this group. and I immediately became defensive and said, well, it was a need to, but over lunch, I really appreciate it. I'm going to go back to that person and say, listen, it was hard to hear, but you're right. I was talking too much in that group, and it's something I've got to work on. So best thing you can do, and cruel to be kind is exactly right. I mean, I've grown in leaps and bounds based on the feedback people have given me, and it's often feedback that's hard to hear. Anybody have examples of having received feedback that made you a better professional that was hard to hear? I can only imagine. What do you think?
I don't think any of us that are in leadership positions have never heard feedback that was hard to hear. But I also think that by virtue of being in that leadership position, or by virtue of hearing that feedback and not sort of melting in the face of it, is what allows us to get to the place that we are right now. So some of us, not all of us, can give the feedback. Right. I think that's the next step, is to be able to give that feedback that's difficult to hear. Right. That I think you said the cruelty of tyranny of niceness. Right. I know that is something that I can suffer from myself at times, is, I need to provide this feedback to my staff, and I'm just holding off, trying to strengthen, trying to build up, trying to do everything but just directly address that individual issue, right? Whereas with myself, I'm the type where I will go to my boss with, we'll start supervision. I'll be like, okay, so this is what you're going to talk to me about. This is what you're going to address. And this is, this is the issue. So let's go, let's get it. This is my plan for addressing those issues and getting better in these areas, right? So I don't even have to hear it. I'm already there. I already have it. Yeah. It's just being able to give it sometimes for me that can be, not the easiest thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Really good point. One of the things I do now is I edit journal articles, and sometimes their colleagues ask me to proofread an article. And a professor I worked with would say, like, this is horrible. Rewrite this, right? I don't do that, but I struggled with knowing, like, well, is this just a stylistic preference that I have, or is this really poorly written?
Yeah.
So yeah, I can totally relate. It's part of my own anxieties about, I don't want to hurt someone if it's a stylistic preference, that kind of. Any other thoughts on that? Feedback. All right. So I should say, just as a housekeeping thing, I'm running a class right after this at 2:00. So I apologize, but I'm just going to end just a little early so I can jump off and prepare just a little bit for that class. All right. So as to Leslie's point, we can all get better at corrective feedback. And one thing we do to keep it safe is make it private when possible. And perhaps we even need to document it. I've been doing this for so long that there have been occasions where I didn't document it, and then it really kind of hit the fan where I should have documented that, right? Because the person is saying they just heard it for the first time, when I know that wasn't true, right? Because I've been meeting with them. But it's good practice just to document corrective feedback. And then, of course, positive feedback. I look for opportunities to give positive feedback and do it publicly and privately. Verbal feedback should precede written feedback. So, so the first time somebody hears about it, they don't want to see it in writing, particularly in an evaluation. And mix feedback whenever possible instead of corrective alone. So you hear things like pat, pat, slap, or a compliment sandwich. I think we can get too cute with that kind of stuff. I mean, you want to be authentic, I think is the key. So we don't want to blow smoke at people either. All right, other feedback, other features. One theory of or school of clinical supervision is based on how people deal with anxiety, and we all deal with anxiety differently. And it went on to say that some people just, regardless, they're going to get angry and defensive. Other people are going to get weepy and apologetic. And it's more about the person than the feedback. But it is helpful to just expect a poor reaction. So you don't go in provoking the poor reaction, but at least expect it. And I've seen all of these reactions over the years. And my personal preference is defensiveness. That's where I go. But all the others here are certainly possible. So I mentioned that, you know, part of, and maybe this is true for you guys too, that you may have come up through the ranks as counselor and rehab people or substance abuse counselors to points of leadership. And so many of us didn't go to school for the leadership, but we learned what we know by doing and by modeling, you know, seeing other people model it. So this is a lesson, took me a while to learn, that I'm not there to rehabilitate the staff person, but I am there to try to help them contribute and grow. So there are some folks that are just not suited for this work. And the sooner they know that, the better. It's particularly true in the academic programs where people are they're training to be a counselor or a therapist, and it just doesn't seem like a good fit, and they need to be counseled out of that line. And of course, they often, by the time they get into the graduate programs, they're going to struggle. So if people need too much help, they may need personal counseling or therapy. That's a course many of us have taken to do the work we needed to do on ourselves to be able to work in mental health. Or they should be counseled out, or, yep, some people just need to be fired. I think I asked the question, has everybody had the experience of firing someone? I think everyone, unfortunately, everybody did. All right, so I remember doing a presentation out in Washington State, and I was talking about this issue of avoiding extremes when supervisees seek advice. And I talked about excessive agnosticism, and I didn't define the term, and it occurred to me they didn't know what that meant. So agnosticism is taking a position of not knowing the right answer, right? It's usually referred to in religious context. If you're an agnostic, you don't know whether God exists or not. You're kind of in the middle. Whereas atheism, of course, is, you know, the belief that God does not exist. But anyway, so avoiding agnosticism is avoiding the thing of like, I don't know, I don't know what to do, and really staying on the fence. So my go-to strategy is, what do you think are your options? How can you think about this? How can you conceptualize this in terms of case conceptualization? That kind of thing. And so that way you may be teaching the person to fish, right? To kind of problem solve their own clinical situations. And then I've seen this actually a good deal with professors being too prescriptive, where particularly in a clinical context, they try to tell you the right answer for this clinical situation. And I think that's very dangerous. All right, and then of course you've heard this before. Same thing with clients, right? If you tell people what to do, then it's your fault if it doesn't work. All right. So how do you avoid resentments as a supervisor? I'm not sure I have a total answer to this, but certainly timely feedback is really important. I recently had a colleague that had a problem with a subordinate, and it just took them so long to talk to the person about the issue that the supervisee was quite offended. And it was really a disservice to that person, and it was based on the anxiety of the supervisor. So when it says not too hot or not too cold, you want to you want to get the feedback to the person as soon as possible after whatever occurred. Don't bend too much. Make reasonable accommodations only. I think this one is critically important. When I was the director of a partial care program, I hired a clinical supervisor for this reason, so I could consult with that person for support, and sometimes instrumental support, meaning I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think of, what do you think? And we were able to talk it through, as opposed to me doing things in isolation. And here's a super key, develop a peer network, others at your level in the, either in your agency or in the same boat as you did. So I joined a professional organization called NJPRA at the time, the New Jersey Psychiatric Rehabilitation Association. And then I moved on to the, it was called the international version of that same professional group. But I suspect those groups exist in the world of drug and alcohol and all the other things. But I would reach out if you're a director and you're feeling the need for a peer network. These professional organizations can really be great. You guys, anybody belong to professional organizations?
Yes, the American Counseling Association.
Yeah. Do you find them supportive, or how do you utilize them?
I utilize them. They give a free CE every month, like one free CE. And then they also do usually like a publication that you get. And so I take advantage of all the free CEs. They're usually really well done, I think. And I haven't really had to use them for much else, luckily. But I also get my liability insurance through them as well.
Okay, yeah. Do they have a conference?
They do, yeah.
Okay.
I haven't been yet, but it's hard to get out for work, for that long. But I would like to go one day.
Nice. Yeah, the professional organization, it's now called USPRA, United States Psych Rehab Association. They have conference all over the United States. I go just to go wherever they are, like Boise, Idaho. I would never go there without the conference. It was great. Any other examples of professional organizations people belong to? How about you, Claire?
I don't belong to any current organizations. The agency belongs to NASW, so that's why I just attended that conference.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. My wife belongs to that. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. All righty. So I'm a big fan of the peer network, and of course you can get as involved as you want to. You can get in. You can help develop the conference and just develop a circle of peers that you can reach out to for whatever. So this was the struggle I experienced as the director of a small partial care program, that I knew I couldn't get my support from my supervisees, and I was not comfortable getting it from the people over me. And so it really became a pretty isolated experience until I reached out, hired a supervisor, and developed a peer network. All right, so back to this idea of providing feedback. Another thing I've experienced is getting an evaluation and really haven't had no feedback prior to the evaluation. So it was kind of a yearly experience of, and luckily apparently I'm fantastic and perfect because my evaluations have been super, but I suspect that's not a function of the feedback that I should have received. So this idea, I'm like a broken record talking about reference standards, but they're really clearly important. What is expected, and how objective are those expectations? Important. So we want to cite as many examples as possible. Focus on performance, of course, not personality. Consistency is super important. And just like Just like in treatment, check for understanding. Make sure we're on the same page. So I mentioned, if you can see the difference, feedback and evaluation. So feedback's the less formal version of offering corrective feedback. And the more formal one, of course, is the performance evaluation, which is often semi-annual or annual. Mine's been annual for the last decade. And here's the time where it's my opportunity to talk about what are my goals for the next year and what are the things I'm being held accountable for. So one reference standard I have as an academic is I've got to publish every year. You might have heard of publish or perish. That's me. I got to do it. So if anybody wants to publish with me, I could use your help. So of course, you look at the performance in critical areas. Usually the organization has some structured evaluation that you can pull on. And there's often required competencies. And here's the opportunity for people to identify professional goals that they may want to work on that are outside of the required competencies. So some people want to develop specialties in trauma or in other types of intervention. So it's a good idea for everyone in the organization, including volunteers, to get a performance evaluation. That's also CEOs and even board members, if you have board members. But it's a really critical time to promote this reflective practice or this reflection on how are we doing, and an opportunity to talk about what are the standards. Are we in agreement about what the standards are? And of course, a lot of us do a lot of different things, wear a lot of different hats. And so we want to keep the evaluation in line with the actual job description of the person. I'm guessing that many of you have mutated into doing types of jobs that may not be reflective anymore of the evaluation, or vice versa. And then, of course, this shouldn't be the only time you hear about stuff like this. So, all right, so this is getting kind of redundant, but you get the idea that here's an opportunity to set some mutually agreed upon goals, which, and what the literature on clinical supervision says is one of the main ways to motivate a supervisee is to identify what they think is important. I'm sure you see the parallel between motivational interviewing and that, but so here's an opportunity to do that. When I was a director of a program, I would go down the list of seniority and talk about what are the programs people are interested in either developing or presenting. And so the most senior people got to present the things they were most interested in. And of course, the most junior people ended up with med ed and stuff that maybe they didn't really want to do, but needed to be done. All right, so we look at those goals as well as the requirements. So some people, and I know you work with some people like this, that their personal goal maybe should be restorative. In other words, you may work with some folks that are kind of martyrs, right? And they're just working too hard, they don't have good boundaries. And for them to do this kind of work long-term, they may want to identify a restorative goal. Or you often hear formative goals, like I want to learn more about this or that. It's interesting what a normative goal would be. Not really sure what a normative goal would be, but perhaps adherence to a particular evidence-based standard, which would also be formative. Oops. So we use this, in the university, we use the SMART acronym for goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Makes sense, right? If it's not measurable, it's going to be hard to hold anybody accountable. And if it's not achievable, why have the goal? So one of the really important reasons to do a good performance evaluation is it is an opportunity for feedback and to get people talking about it. Now, hopefully we've been talking about it all year, but in the event we've been busy, here's a time really dedicated for this to really unpack it as best we can. So I would take a good amount of time to do the performance evaluation, get people talking about their experience. Recognizing achievements is a good time. This functions as another placeholder for documentation about how the person is doing. And hopefully reinforces feedback they've been receiving all along as part of clinical supervision. And maybe it's not in the supervision session. If you do group supervision, you may be doing it privately, or if you supervise people one-to-one, then maybe it is in supervision. It's getting wordy, very wordy. So this is my partner that makes these slides. I think there's too much on this slide. But you get the idea that the more structured we keep performance evaluations, probably the better. It's not the kind of thing you want to do at the on the go, on the fly, but to really give it some thought and kind of prepare as the supervisor for the performance evaluation. So what are the issues relative to performance evaluations? Of course, they're cumbersome and time intensive. I think what happens in the clinical settings is we always have multiple priorities. And if this one makes you anxious, then this could be the one that you give short shift. So that can be a problem. So this is all the more reason to really take it seriously and prepare for it and make it kind of a big deal. Oftentimes, performance evaluations simply aren't specific enough. So person's receiving very general feedback and it's hard to act on. So the more specific, the better. I don't know if you ever heard of Lake Wobegon, but apparently in Lake Wobegon, all of our kids are above average, right? And that's true for performance evaluations. Most people believe they're above average and they're doing great. And of course, that's, that's statistically not possible. And then evaluators often feel unskilled and apprehensive. I certainly share this. It's anxiety producing. And then lastly, I think I used this term early in the supervision sessions, but this idea of snoopervision, that we want to come out of the evaluation with the person still feeling safe enough to accept feedback and be vulnerable. So snoopervision, of course, is the opposite. It's where a person feels under surveillance. All right, so some common mistakes. We mentioned this before, but when it's the only feedback tool or it's done very quickly, my boss actually sends me my evaluation via email and asks me to sign it. That's the extent of my evaluation. You should probably go through this session. So I think here's where the tyranny of niceness can show up. And so if people are uncomfortable, it can turn into defensiveness or simply the person's not getting the feedback they need. Low preparation, and when there's a non-alignment on goals and or plans. So right, whatever we're asking the person to do based on the evaluation, if it doesn't line up with what the evaluation talked about, that's a big problem. So any thoughts on this evaluation process? Is this something people struggle with, or are they feeling pretty good about doing performance evaluations?
I think the number for me, it's been not having an evaluation tool that was specific to competencies.
Yep.
It's just been kind of generalized, and everyone in the organization gets the same evaluation. So we have been working on developing evaluations based on competencies.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a pretty demoralizing experience. I went through an evaluation round where all of my colleagues got the same evaluation I did. Everybody was excellent, but I had published like 4 papers that year and got a National Institute of Health grant, and I was just riding by. I don't know how somebody who didn't publish anything got an excellent and I got an excellent. But there's an example. It just wasn't related to what we were doing or our competencies, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So, it's a good evaluation when people know whether they have met expectations. I love the idea of focusing on competencies. I find it difficult. It's more complicated than I realized, the idea of unpacking competencies, but it's worth doing, I think. And if people know an area where they can improve and how to do that, I think that's really good as well. And then some of their major strengths, which is really good. We don't want to, it is really about an overall assessment. Like, here are the strengths, here's the areas maybe you could improve upon. So I don't know if this applies to you guys, but many of the places we work, we have consumers, meaning folks who, in my case, have experienced having a mental illness, but are also professionals. They're in the field. And in fact, a colleague of mine just got her PhD on the supervision of consumers in the workplace. But this first one is really important in this aspect, where consumers have to be careful not to confuse their viewpoints or experiences with recovery with their subordinates. And this is, don't be too easy or too hard on them, absolutely. So if you're working with consumers, don't take into account the illness, but don't let it become an excuse. I think this is a term from a woman named Patricia Deegan, the soft bigotry of low expectations. So if you're working with consumers, maybe somebody who's experienced drug and alcohol addiction, and now they're professionals in the field, avoid the soft bigotry of low expectations. And then encourage the person to have a relapse plan in order to maintain a role as worker or volunteer. It's a touchy situation. I was in a program where people would graduate as a consumer and go right into being a professional within that same organization. And I'll tell you, the dual relationships, we never worked it out. And we ended up asking the person to leave for a year before they would come back as a professional. It was just so complicated. Do people have consumers working in their agencies? I bet, Leslie, you do, don't you?
We have in the past. We have a person who we have in the past, I'll say that first. And the number of times that we've done it, it hasn't worked long term. Yeah. There tends to be an issue, and it's hard to say, but it's like, if somebody is identifying as a peer, then the expectation should be that it's possible for them to have another crisis at some point in their life. But then the sort of conundrum comes in when someone has lived experience, but then is presenting not as a peer, but as a traditional staff, right? For us, like I said earlier, we do a lot of CSS work, and that doesn't pay the same rate as it does for peers as it does for people with a bachelor's degree or whatever. So there's really not much impetus to do that. Yep. But it can cause an issue. And we currently have someone who is a consultant for us that was once one of the consumers.
Right.
So it can be a little sticky of a situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. As I mentioned, I have another course I've got to teach at 2 o'clock, so I'm gonna wrap it up. Any thoughts before we go? I will say we're gonna have just one more session. We have another topic, but I looked at it pretty closely, and much of that information is redundant and has been covered in that, particularly in this section. So we're just going to meet one more time, and we'll wrap it up. And I'd love to, at that point, get your thoughts on making this better, and like, you know, what are some recommendations. But at that point, I'm gonna leave it here, and I'll see you next time. Stay well, everybody.
All right,
Thank you
stay
so
well.
much.
Thank
Have
you.
a great one, everyone. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.